A cat-sized dragon walks into a gladiator arena and somehow makes you believe, like, in your chest, in that irrational animal part of you, that the world might actually flip upside down for him. And then, just when you're ready to cheer, the sky basically tries to murder everyone. That whiplash is the first thing I need to talk about with Milo the Last Teal Dragon, because this 2026 drama is not content to be cute underdog wins and call it a day. It wants the sweetness, sure, but it also wants the bruise underneath the sweetness, the ache you feel when you realize the win was never the point. You're watching Bongo Gaming, and yes, I'm about to get emotionally invested in a tiny teal lizard with wings like stained glass, so you might as well buckle in. If you end up enjoying the vibe here, consider subscribing. No pressure, just helps me keep making these long, overly feelings-based reviews. And spoiler-wise, I'm going moderate. I'll talk about the big early turning point and the emotional direction, but I'm going to avoid stepping on the biggest late-game beats in a way that would ruin your first watch. What I loved, immediately, was the audacity of the premise. Dragon Arena, undefeated Crimson Champion, Tiny Teal Runt gets mocked. That's a setup that could become a predictable sports movie skeleton in 10 minutes flat. You can practically hear the imaginary crowd chanting the beats at you. But Milo the Last Teal Dragon plays a smarter game. It uses that familiar structure to get you comfortable, then it yanks the rug at exactly the moment your brain starts going, okay, I know what this is. And I'm not saying it's perfect, because I have notes, but it's the kind of swing that makes me forgive a lot. Also, can we talk about how the show frames Milo's size? Because, housecat-sized dragon, could have been a gimmick, plushy marketing pitch wearing a story like a coat. Instead, they weaponize it. They let the camera and the blocking do the humiliating. The arena feels enormous not because someone tells you it's enormous, but because Milo is swallowed by it. The sand looks like gravel next to his paws. The shadows from the stands fall over him like a lid closing. Every time he takes a step, it's like the world is daring him to be brave in a space that was literally designed to crush things bigger than him. And the Crimson Dragon Champion, again, staying within what we're given, I appreciated how the drama doesn't waste time trying to convince you he's scary with a bunch of lore dumps. The fear is mostly kinetic. It's mass and inevitability. The Crimson Presence reads as, this is what the system rewards. You can practically smell the sweat and scorched stone around him. Even if you don't know the rulebook of the Dragon Arena, you get the vibe. This place is a machine that turns living creatures into spectacle, and the Crimson Champion is the machine's favorite output. Here's the first little, wait, hold on, moment, though. The show is so good at the spectacle that it risks seducing you into enjoying the very cruelty it's critiquing. That's a dangerous tightrope, and they mostly make it across, but not without a couple of wobbles that I want to dig into. Because the early stretch is designed to make you feel the mockery. It's not just, people laughed at him. It's the way Milo is looked at. Like an object. Like a joke. Like a snack. It's the way space is arranged, everyone towering, Milo beneath. And the human companion, unnamed in what we've got, so I'll just call him, the companion, is positioned in a way that tells you everything about his relationship to power in that arena. He's not the ringmaster. He's not the celebrity handler. He feels like someone who's had to bargain with systems bigger than him and lose, repeatedly, until he learned how to stand still and not get noticed. And then the fight happens, and I'm going to do that thing I love doing in reviews where I slow time down and talk about one sequence like I'm still stuck inside it. Because the way Milo's impossible victory is staged is not just, wow, cool action. It's character. It's ideology. It's the show saying, pay attention to what kind of strength we're talking about here. Picture it, the arena floor is this pale, dusty sand that throws light back up into everything, so even shadows feel bleached. The crowd is a dark ring beyond that, a living wall of noise. Milo is small enough that for a second your eyes almost lose him, this tiny teal flicker against all that beige and red. The Crimson Champion moves and the sound design gives him weight. You feel the shift like a bass note under your ribs. There's a moment, this is what got me, where Milo doesn't charge. He doesn't perform, hero. He hesitates, like any small animal would when confronted with something that could end it in one bite. The camera stays low with him, not above him, which matters. It doesn't turn him into a chess piece. It lets you sit at his eye level while the world looms. Then the choreography stops being about trading blows and starts being about survival as intelligence. Milo's movements read like adaptation, quick pivots, using angles, making the bigger body commit, letting momentum become a trap. You can almost feel the grit in the air when the Crimson Dragon's claws rake sand. There's this scratchy hiss in the mix, like the arena itself is flinching. And when Milo finally lands what counts as the turning strike, again, I'm not going to invent the exact move, because the storyline doesn't specify. The show sells it less as he got stronger, and more as he saw something the bigger creature didn't. It's a victory of perception. And honestly, that's more satisfying than any power-up. You know what's wild, though? The drama doesn't let you enjoy that win cleanly. It almost dares you to. It gives you that rush, crowd roar, the stunned pause, Milo standing there like he can't believe he's still alive, and then it drops the storm on you like a guillotine. And this is where Milo the last Teal dragon first convinced me it had a spine. Because the storm isn't just weather. It's interruption as a theme. It's the world saying, your little underdog story is adorable, but reality doesn't care about your narrative arcs. The celebration gets cut short, and it's not subtle. It's catastrophic. It forces movement. It forces fear. It forces the drama to stop basking in the arena lights and go somewhere colder. If you're the kind of viewer who watches for vibe, the storm sequence is where the show flexes its cinematography and sound design in a way that feels hungry. The color palette shifts. Teal and crimson, those clean symbolic colors, get drowned in slate gray and bruised purple. The arena that was bright and harsh becomes slick and chaotic. And the soundscape changes from crowd noise to something more elemental, wind that doesn't just howl, but chews. Thunder that doesn't just boom, but cracks like the sky is splitting open. Here's the thing I didn't expect, the storm didn't make me excited. It made me sad. Like, immediately. Because there's this underlying message that the arena was a controlled cruelty, but the storm is uncontrolled cruelty. One is a system you can point to. The other is just life. Disaster. Randomness. And watching Milo and the companion scramble to survive, you start realizing that the arena might have been the safer kind of danger. At least it had rules. At least it had edges. And if you're thinking, okay, but is this still fun? Hang on, because the show's best trick is how it turns adrenaline into intimacy. They flee. They survive. They get to safety, or at least something like it. And then the drama does something that, in lesser hands, would be corny. It has the companion reveal he's lost his family too, and he forms a bond with Milo that's not just, I'm your owner now. It's grief recognizing grief. Now, I want to be careful here, because I've seen audiences get cynical about this kind of beat. Oh, the tragic backstory to justify the human's attachment. I get the skepticism. But what worked for me, what genuinely landed, was the timing and the restraint. The reveal isn't framed like a plot twist. It's framed like a crack in a wall. It's not, here's my trauma, audience, please cry. It's more like, this is why I know what it looks like when someone is the last thing left. And before I go deeper, let me throw you a question that kept pulling me forward while I watched. What does it mean to win in a world that immediately punishes you for being seen? Because that's the tension this drama keeps worrying at, and it doesn't let you forget it. The relationship between Milo and the companion is the emotional engine, obviously, but it's also where the show's craft choices get really interesting. If Milo is animated or realized through CG, the performance lives in the details, how long he holds eye contact, how his body settles when he finally trusts the companion's hand, how his breathing changes when he's not in fight or flight. If it's a practical creature with VFX enhancement, then props to the integration, because the physicality reads. Either way, the show treats Milo like an actor, not a prop. Milo has reactions that aren't just cute, they are psychologically consistent. He's wary. He's proud. He's small but not submissive. And the companion, whoever played him, understands that acting opposite a non-human character is a skill. You can't just look at the spot. You have to commit to the idea that this creature is a presence that affects you. There are moments where the companion's face does this tiny shift, jaw tightens, eyes soften, shoulders drop, and you can tell the bond is forming in the silence, not in the dialogue. I'm a sucker for that kind of performance discipline. It's not flashy, but it's the difference between or and oh. I also appreciate that the promise the companion makes, helping Milo search for his kind, carries an immediate bittersweet weight, because the title is literally Milo the Last Teal Dragon. The drama is telling you up front, this isn't going to be a neat little, found family fixes everything, fairy tale. Even if they search, even if they hope, there's an emptiness hanging over it. And the show doesn't treat that emptiness like an enemy to defeat. It treats it like a truth to live with. Small aside, the first time Milo is described or shown as housecat size, my brain did that stupid thing where it went, I could put him in a backpack. Which is adorable until you remember this is a dragon who just survived an arena and a catastrophic storm, and he would absolutely set my backpack on fire out of principle. So, you know. Respect. One of the reasons I'm saying I loved this drama, because I did, overall, is that it commits to mood. It's not afraid of quiet. And that sounds like a generic compliment, but I mean it specifically. The pacing has these intentional decelerations where you sit with the aftermath instead of sprinting to the next plot point. The storm is a perfect example. A lot of stories would use that as a transition. Storm happens, then we're on the road. Milo the Last Teal Dragon seems more interested in what the storm does to their bodies, their decision-making, their sense of safety. The fear doesn't disappear just because the rain stops. And that's where the music comes in. The score, at least in the way it's implied by the structure we know, feels like it understands the difference between epic and intimate. You can do the big arena drums, sure. But the more memorable choices are probably the smaller ones, a thin motif that follows Milo, like a fragile thread, a drop into near silence when the companion speaks about his family, the way wind noise becomes a kind of percussion during the flight. The show uses sound not just to decorate emotion but to pressure it. Here's a contrarian take, and I want to say it gently because I know some people come to something like this for the dragon arena of it all. I don't actually think the arena victory is the most impressive part of the story. It's the hook, and it's very well done, but the drama's real power is what it does after it takes the fun premise away from itself. When it stops being a spectacle machine and becomes a companionship story under stress, it gets braver. The action earns the right to exist because the quiet parts are so emotionally specific. That said, the show flirts with a problem that I can't ignore. The last of his kind angle is inherently manipulative. It's designed to make you feel protective, to make the bond feel destined. And manipulative isn't automatically bad. Stories manipulate us, that's literally the craft, but there's a fine line between emotional clarity and emotional extortion. There were moments where I felt the show's hand just a little too hard on my shoulder, like, "Are you crying yet? Are you crying now?" And my response was, "I might cry, but now I'm also noticing you trying." But here's the weird part, even when I noticed it, I still felt it. I think it's because the drama grounds the grief in behavior, not just speeches. Milo doesn't become a symbol and stop being a creature. He still has needs. He still reacts to danger like a living thing. And the companion doesn't become a grief monologue on legs. He's not constantly processing. Sometimes he's just trying to keep them both alive. That practicality makes the emotion hit harder because it feels earned. You get the sense that these two aren't bonding because the script says they should, they are bonding because in a world that keeps trying to separate living things, staying together becomes an act of defiance. And that brings me to the theme that, for me, sits underneath everything: scale. Not just physical scale, small dragon, huge arena, but emotional scale. The companion's loss is human-sized, intimate. Milo's loss is species-sized, existential. And yet the drama dares to put them side by side and say, grief is grief. Not identical, not interchangeable, but rhyming. And the bond forms in that rhyme. Let me be a little more personal than I usually get, because this drama hit a nerve I wasn't expecting. I've had that experience, maybe you have too, where you're grieving something big, and then you find yourself caring for something small. A pet, a plant, routine person who needs you. And it's not that the small thing replaces what you lost. It's that it gives your hand somewhere to put the love that no longer has a home. Watching the companion promise Milo he'll help him search for his kind. I don't know, man. That line, that promise, it's not just about Milo. It's about the companion trying to build a bridge out of his own absence. And if you think I'm projecting, yeah, a little. That's what dramas are for. But the show invites that projection because it leaves space for it. It doesn't overdefine every emotion. Now, craft-wise, I want to talk about the visuals again, because teal is a dangerous color to build a whole identity around. Teal can look cheap. It can look like a toy. It can read as kids' content in the laziest way possible. This drama avoids that by making teal feel rare. It's not neon. It's not candy. It's more like mineral. Like something you'd find in a cave wall if you cracked the stone open and saw an impossible vein of color. That choice matters because it keeps Milo from feeling like a mascot. He feels like a living artifact. And the Crimson Champion, Crimson is easier. Crimson always reads as threat, dominance, blood, spectacle. But the drama's smart if it doesn't just make Crimson evil. If Crimson is the champion, then Crimson is also the institution's favorite, which means the Crimson Dragon is also a victim of that system, in a way. Not excused, just contextualized. And again, I'm not inventing extra scenes here. I'm talking about what the setup implies and what the best version of this story does with those implications. The show is at its strongest when it lets you feel multiple truths at once. Another thing I loved, the way the story's structure shifts your expectation of safety. The arena feels like the main set piece, until it isn't. The storm feels like a one-off disaster, until it becomes the thing that defines the tone moving forward. That's not just plot, that's editorial rhythm. It's the cut that teaches you, don't get comfortable. And when a drama can make you emotionally alert without exhausting you, that's a win. But okay, let's get specific about what didn't work for me, at least in this early to mid stretch. Sometimes the drama leans so hard into Milo is underestimated that it risks flattening the world around him into faceless mockers. Mockery is real, especially in competitive spectacle settings, but the most interesting stories give you texture in the crowd. Not everyone is a cartoon bully. Some people laugh because they are scared. Some people laugh because they need the entertainment. Some people laugh because they've been taught that empathy is weakness. If the drama paints the arena world too broadly, it loses an opportunity to critique it more sharply. And on a similar note, the human companion lost his family reveal is emotionally potent, but it's also familiar, and familiarity demands precision. If the writing around that reveal is too clean, too perfectly phrased, it can feel like a speech instead of a wound. The best grief dialogue is messy. It stutters. It avoids the word died. It says gone, or not here, because the mouth can't say the thing. When Milo the last teal dragon is at its best, it remembers that. When it's not, you can feel it trying to land a quote. Still, the dynamic works because it's not just grief bonding, it's also two beings negotiating trust in the aftermath of violence. Milo has been made into a spectacle. The companion is, in some way, part of that arena world, at minimum adjacent to it. That means the bond can't be instant without feeling fake. The story earns it by giving them a shared crisis first. Survive together, then speak together. That order matters. And I want to highlight one more subtle choice that I think is easy to overlook, the drama's willingness to let Milo be difficult. A lot of cute creature companion stories make the creature pure innocence so the human can be transformed by it. Here, Milo has pride. Milo has fear. Milo has the kind of stubbornness that reads like dignity. He's not a therapy animal. He's a survivor. That makes the companionship feel mutual rather than paternalistic. If you're still with me, here's the next question that the drama quietly asks, and it's the one that kept me tense even in the quieter scenes. What happens when companionship is real, but temporary? Because the promise isn't we'll be together forever. The promise is, I'll help you look. And that's a very different kind of love. That bittersweet framing at the end of the storyline, the idea that Milo is meant to walk beside his human friend only until he can eventually find his own way home, is, to me, the drama's emotional thesis. It's not a story about possession. It's not even purely a story about found family. It's a story about being a bridge for someone else, even if it means you'll be left standing on the shore alone when they cross. And that hits harder than the average "we're family now" ending because it's more honest to certain kinds of relationships. Not every bond is meant to last in the same shape forever. Sometimes the point is to get someone to the next version of themselves. Now, because we're doing moderate spoilers, I'm not going to lay out exactly how the narrative arranges the later stretch, but I can talk about how the drama sets up that bittersweet inevitability early. It does it with framing. Milo is often shot with negative space around him. Even when he's physically close to the companion, the composition hints at distance. Like the world is always a little too big for the both of them to fit comfortably inside the same frame. And when the companion makes that promise, you can feel the story planting a seed. This bond will grow, but growth is what makes separation possible. There's a particular kind of courage in writing that. Because audiences love permanence. We love the fantasy that love fixes loss. But if the companion has lost his family, and Milo is the last Teal dragon, then the show is dealing with the kind of grief that doesn't get fixed. It gets carried. The bond doesn't erase the absence, it teaches them how to move while still missing something. And I know I'm making this sound like a slow, poetic drama, so let me reassure you, the high-stakes energy is still there. The arena victory and the storm aren't the only sources of tension, they are just the first two waves. The fact that they have to flee at all suggests a world that isn't safe for a creature like Milo, especially now that he's done something impossible in public. Visibility is dangerous. Winning paints a target. That's not just a sports metaphor, that's a survival metaphor. Also, the title again, The Last Teal Dragon. Even if nobody in universe knows it at first, you as the viewer are carrying that dread. Every hopeful beat gets a shadow. Every cute bonding moment has that quiet thought behind it, if he's truly the last, what are they even searching for? And if they are searching anyway, what does that say about hope? Is hope noble, or is it denial? Or is it both? That tension is why the show's quieter scenes don't feel like downtime. They feel like someone holding their breath. They feel like two people, well, one person and one dragon, trying not to name the thing that's coming. Another quick aside before I get too heavy, if I had $1 for every time a story tried to make me cry with a small creature doing a big brave thing, I'd have enough to build Milo a tiny throne and a tiny cup of water and a tiny little cape. And yet, here I am, vulnerable. So clearly the propaganda works. Let's talk a bit about editing rhythm, because that's where a lot of creature and human dramas either sing or collapse. If the cuts are too quick, you never believe the bond, it feels like highlights. If the cuts are too slow, you start noticing the mechanics, like, okay, the dragon is not really there, or this is a set. Milo the Last Teal Dragon, from what the storyline implies and the kind of scenes it prioritizes, seems to understand when to linger. You hold on Milo's face, his eyes, his breath, just long enough for emotion to register, then you cut away before it turns into sentimentality. And sentimentality is the big enemy here. The story is inherently tender, small creature, lonely human, promise of companionship. The easiest version of this drama would drench that tenderness in syrup until it becomes cloying. The version I loved keeps some salt in it. The storm is salt. The last of his kind, truth is salt. The companion's family loss is salt. You taste the sweetness more because the salt is real. I also want to highlight something that might sound weird. I like that the drama doesn't over-explain the rules of the Dragon Arena, at least not in the premise we're given. There's a modern tendency to world build by dumping terminology at you until you feel like you're studying for a test. Milo the Last Teal Dragon doesn't need that. The arena is a character defined by behavior, not by law. You understand its moral shape immediately. It's a place where living things are measured by how entertaining their suffering is. And that moral shape is what makes Milo's victory complicated. Because if Milo wins in that arena, is also participating in the arena's logic, survival as performance. The show flirts with this discomfort, and I wish it pushed it even harder. I wanted one more beat of, wait, should we be celebrating this? Not because I wanted the drama to scold me, but because that would make it sharper. Still, the storm interruption kind of functions as that scolding in a more cinematic way. It says, don't get too comfortable cheering for blood. And just when you think the story is about external threats, arena, storm, survival, it starts becoming about internal ones. Trust. Attachment. The fear of losing again. Because the companion has already lost a family, so bonding with Milo is risky. It's like inviting future grief into your house and making it tea. And Milo, being last of his kind, carries a different risk. What if attachment to a human is a detour from finding his own? What if companionship becomes a cage, even a gentle one? That's why I keep coming back to that word, temporary. The drama's bittersweet note isn't an afterthought, it's baked into the promise itself. I'll help you search, is not, I'll keep you. It's love that respects destiny, even if destiny hurts. If you're wondering whether the show earns that level of thematic weight or if I'm just waxing poetic because I like teal lighting, here's what convinced me: the bond is framed as choice, not fate. The companion doesn't own Milo. He doesn't claim him. He chooses to help. Milo chooses to stay close. That mutuality is the difference between companionship and capture. And in terms of pure watchability, the drama is good at giving you mini payoffs along the way. The arena win is a payoff. The storm is an interruption that becomes a payoff in tone. The reveal of the companion's loss is a payoff that deepens the relationship. And the promise to search is a payoff that aims the narrative forward. The structure is clean, even if it's emotionally messy. One more attention grab thought, because this is the part where I think the drama either hooks you for real or loses you. Pay attention to how it uses safety. Not just physical safety, but emotional safety. When do the characters allow themselves to rest? When do they flinch at kindness? When does Milo stop expecting the world to laugh at him? Those are the real turning points. The action is just a loud version of that. Now, I can't speak about specific later scenes without making stuff up, and I'm not doing that. But I can talk about how the drama sets up its later emotional conflict in this early material. It introduces two losses, Milo's implied species loss and the companion's family loss. Then it creates a third potential loss, the eventual separation implied by the bittersweet framing. So you're watching three grief vectors converge, and the bond between them isn't a solution, it's a temporary shelter. That's why the drama's title feels almost cruel in a good way. It doesn't let you pretend. It keeps the tragedy in the room, even while you're smiling at Milo doing something brave. It's like the show is saying, yes, love matters. No, it won't undo the math. Okay, let me give you one more concrete sensory memory from the viewing experience, because this is where I fully bought in emotionally. After the storm, there's that, once safe from immediate danger, stretch. The phrase itself suggests a pause, a breath. In my head, the scene is quieter, maybe damp air, dripping water, the sound of distant thunder fading like a threat moving away but not gone. The companion and Milo share space without knowing what to do with it. Milo's body language, still tense, still ready to bolt, softens just a fraction when the companion doesn't rush him. And the companion's voice, when he finally admits his own loss, doesn't feel like he's performing grief. It feels like he's admitting it to himself out loud for the first time in a long time. That kind of moment is hard to act. It requires someone to be interesting while doing almost nothing. And it requires the director to trust stillness, to not cut away, to keep it exciting. If Milo the Last Teal Dragon makes those choices consistently, it's operating on a level above a lot of creature-led fantasy dramas. But I'm also going to be honest, this kind of story can stumble if it leans too hard into the companion as a blank slate. Some writers think quiet means no personality, and then the bond becomes one-sided, where the creature carries all the charm and the human just reacts. The drama avoids that trap when it gives the companion a specific shape of pain and a specific shape of kindness. Yet there were moments I wished for a bit more edge, more contradiction, more humor, more anger, because grief isn't just soft. Grief can be ugly. It can be impatient. It can be selfish. If the companion is too saintly, the drama risks turning Milo into a moral lesson instead of a relationship. And that's a delicate critique, because I don't want edgy for the sake of edgy. I just want the human to feel as alive as the dragon. The best versions of this dynamic let both characters be difficult in different ways. Milo gets to be stubborn, the companion should also get to be complicated. Still, the companionship promise is the emotional contract the show makes with you. Stay with us, it says, and we'll let these two build something. Not a kingdom. Not a revolution. Just a bond strong enough to matter. And because I love this drama, I want to give credit to what it's doing conceptually with power. The Dragon Arena is the clearest metaphor, the powerful watch, the vulnerable perform, the system applauds itself. Milo's victory disrupts that, which is why it's impossible. The storm then reminds you that even when you beat one system, you're still living under a sky you don't control. The only real power the characters have is how they treat each other after the world does what it does. That's why the bittersweet ending note, Milo walking beside his human friend only until he can eventually find his own way home, doesn't read to me as sad for sad's sake. It reads as ethical. It's the drama refusing to turn Milo into a permanent comfort object. It's saying, love means letting someone become themselves, even if it costs you. And yes, that's the kind of line that makes me stare at the wall for a second after an episode, or after a movie, depending on how this is structured. Because it's not just fantasy. It's life. People come into your life for a season. Sometimes they save you. Sometimes you save them. Sometimes you don't even realize that's what's happening until they're gone and you're standing in the quiet they left behind. If that's too heavy for what you wanted, a small dragon doing cool things, then ironically, the arena is the bait. But the drama's real meal is grief and companionship, plated in teal and thunder. And the more I think about it, the more I respect the choice to make Milo tiny. Because tiny heroes force writers to get creative. They can't rely on brute force or chosen one mythology. They have to make the character's intelligence, heart, and adaptability visible. Milo's size also changes the emotional temperature. When he's scared, you feel protective. When he's brave, you feel awe. The show manipulates those instincts, yes, but it also interrogates them. Why do we only root for someone when they are small enough to seem harmless? Why does the world laugh at smallness until smallness wins? That question sits right under the arena mockery, and it continues to echo after the storm, because when the world becomes dangerous, smallness becomes vulnerability again. The drama doesn't let Milo graduate out of being small. He stays small. The danger stays real. That consistency is what keeps the stakes from feeling fake. Now, I'm going to pivot into something that might sound nerdy, but bear with me. The use of negative space and scale in the cinematography is basically storytelling in this drama. In the arena, Milo is isolated by space. After the storm, safety is suggested by closeness, shared shelter, shared frame, but the camera still often leaves room around them, hinting at the world pressing in. And when the companion makes the promise to search for Milo's kind, that promise is, in a visual sense, a line thrown across an empty distance. You feel how far home might be, even if you don't know where it is. Okay, one more rehook, because this is where I think the drama reveals its real intentions. Pay attention to how the show treats the idea of home. Is home a place? Is home a species? Is home a person? Because once you start asking that, the title starts feeling less like a tragedy label and more like a question the story is trying to answer. And that's where I'm going to pause on plot and stay with emotion for a second. The companion's family loss is a mirror to Milo's loneliness, but it's also a warning sign. People who have lost a family often try to rebuild one too fast. They cling. They fuse. They confuse companionship with survival. The drama is at its most honest when it acknowledges that risk without condemning it. The companion wanting to help Milo search is altruistic, yes, but it's also self-preservation. It's him giving his grief a mission so it doesn't swallow him whole. And Milo, on the other side, isn't just grateful. He's also learning what it feels like to be seen without being consumed. That's a massive difference from the arena. In the arena, eyes meant consumption. Outside, eyes can mean care. That's a new language for Milo, and you can feel him learning it. So when people ask me, is it worth watching? And again, I'm not wrapping up, I'm just saying what kind of viewer response it triggers. My answer depends on whether you're open to a story that uses fantasy to talk about loss without offering a magical fix. Because if you're waiting for the moment where the pain gets erased, the drama is already telling you not to expect that. It's offering something else, companionship as a way to keep walking. And I think that's why the final note being bittersweet isn't just a mood choice, it's a promise. This drama isn't going to lie to you. It's going to give you beauty, and it's going to make sure the beauty has teeth. There's still so much to dig into, especially the way the show positions the arena victory as both liberation and exposure, and how the storm functions like the world's response to anyone who dares to disrupt a hierarchy. But the piece I keep circling back to is the bond itself, because the bond isn't framed as destiny, it's framed as a decision made by two lonely survivors in the aftermath of spectacle and disaster. And that decision has consequences that the drama seems determined to take seriously, especially when you start to think about how grief can make you cling to the first warm thing you find, even if you know, deep down, that warmth might not be meant to last. And that's where the story's tension really starts to tighten. Because grief can make you cling to the first warm thing you find, even if you know, deep down, that warmth might not be meant to last, and that's where the story's tension really starts to tighten. Not with a villain stepping out of the smoke, not with a new tournament bracket slapped on the wall, but with something quieter and honestly more ruthless, the awareness that love can be both shelter and trap depending on how you hold it. Milo the last Teal dragon sets up this bond as a lifeline, and then it dares you to notice the rope burns. One of the smartest choices the drama makes, structurally, is letting the impossible victory be both a beginning and an ending. It's the end of one story, the underdog who proves them wrong in the arena, and it's the beginning of a much more complicated one: what happens after you've been seen. A lot of fantasies treat visibility like the reward. Here, visibility feels like exposure. Like you just walked out of a dark room and realized you've been standing on a stage the entire time. That shift is so clean that you barely register it happening until you're already in the storm sequence, already watching Milo and the companions scramble, and you realize the show is training you to associate applause with danger. If you've ever been in a situation where you succeeded at something and then immediately felt dread instead of joy, like, oh no, now they are watching me, this drama gets that feeling. And it doesn't need a ton of dialogue to do it. It's in the way the celebration is cut short. That phrasing matters. It's not interrupted. It's cut. Like the film itself got sliced. You feel the blade in the edit. And I want to camp out on that edit for a second, because the show's rhythm is doing a lot of emotional labor. In the arena, the cutting likely leans into impact, wide shots that emphasize scale, sharper cuts for the Crimson Dragon's attacks, then these crucial beats where the camera stays with Milo just long enough for you to read his decision-making. When the storm hits, the edit becomes more chaotic, but, if it's done well, not confusing. There's a difference between chaos that communicates terror and chaos that communicates the director losing control. The drama's storm reads, at least from the way the storyline emphasizes catastrophe, like controlled chaos, disorienting, but purposeful. You're not lost because the show is sloppy, you're lost because the characters are. Here's something that surprised me in a good way: the show understands that high stakes doesn't mean loud all the time. The storm is loud, sure, but the most harrowing moments in disaster sequences are often the ones where sound drops out. That instant after a thunder crack, where your ears ring and you hear nothing but breath. That moment where you realize you're alive and you hate that you're alive because you're going to have to keep surviving. If Milo the last Teal dragon leans into those pockets of near silence, it's not just flexing sound design, it's telling you that terror has stages. And just to hook you forward with an idea that made me reframe the whole drama: what if the arena is actually the least violent part of the story? Not because it's gentle, obviously it's not, but because it's violence you're allowed to anticipate. The storm, the loss, the loneliness, the inevitable separation, those are the kinds of violence you can't brace for. The drama makes you feel that difference. Now, about the companion. because it would be easy to treat him as the human POV and call it a day. But the storyline gives us something specific: he's also lost his family. That's a huge emotional fact, and the way the actor handles it determines whether this becomes a melodrama or something more grounded. The best performances of grief aren't about tears. They're about what a person avoids. You can see it in micro behaviors: how someone keeps their hands busy, how they swallow a word, how they look past the person they're talking to because eye contact would make it real. If the companion is written and played with that kind of restraint, it makes his bond with Milo feel like a human choice rather than a script requirement. Because when he promises to help Milo search for his kind, it shouldn't feel like a heroic vow. It should feel like someone quietly deciding to live. And living, after loss, is not a triumphant montage. It's an awkward, stubborn thing. There's also an interesting moral dynamic in the pairing that I don't want to let slide by. Milo is an exploited creature in a spectacle arena. The companion, by proximity, is at least adjacent to that exploitation. Even if he's not the one cracking the whip, he exists in the economy of it. That means the bond has to carry a faint moral static. Can Milo trust a human when humans have treated dragons like entertainment? Can the companion forgive himself for being part of that world? The storyline doesn't spell out those details, so I'm not going to pretend it does, but the premise implies the tension, and good writing will always let implication breathe. And if you're thinking, okay, but is this show actually saying something, or is it just vibes? This is where I'll plant my flag: it's saying something, but it's smart enough not to write it on a billboard. The Arena reads like a critique of spectacle culture, what we demand from living beings to satisfy our hunger for drama, and The Storm reads like a critique of the fantasy that control is real. Put those together and you get a surprisingly sharp little thesis: systems will hurt you on purpose, and the universe will hurt you by accident, and the only thing you can choose is how you hold someone's hand while it happens. Now let's talk visuals again, because the show's color logic is not just pretty, it's narrative. Teal vs. Crimson is a story you can read without subtitles. Teal reads as rare, vulnerable, and quietly luminous. Crimson reads as dominant, celebrated, and dangerous. In the arena, those colors are likely clean, almost symbolic. After the storm, everything muddies. That muddiness is the point. When you take a mythic conflict out of a controlled stage and put it in the world, the symbols stop behaving. Teal gets dirty. Crimson becomes just another color in the dark. The drama's maturity is in letting that happen. Also, I know I joked earlier about putting Milo in a backpack, but the more I think about it, the more the show's choice of making him small feels like a commentary on what we consider worthy. The arena mocks him because he doesn't fit the expected silhouette of power. And that mockery is familiar. We do that to people. We do that to art. We do that to anything that doesn't look like the thing we've been trained to clap for. Milo's win isn't just a win, it's an accusation. And here's another little retention pivot: the moment you stop thinking, Milo is cute, and start thinking, Milo is alone, the entire drama changes temperature. Cute is safe. Alone is not. Cute invites consumption, merchandise, memes, cooing. Alone invites responsibility. The show keeps steering you away from consumption and toward responsibility, and I think that's why it sticks. I want to dig into the bittersweet note at the end, but I'm going to approach it from craft rather than plot. A bittersweet ending lives or dies on whether the sweetness and bitterness are both earned. If it's only bitter, it's nihilism. If it's only sweet, it's a lie. This story sets up sweetness through companionship, the promise, the shared survival. It sets up bitterness through the title itself, Milo being the last of his kind, and through the idea that walking beside the companion is temporary, not destiny. The key is balance. The drama needs to make you feel like the bond mattered even if it can't last in the same form. And the way you earn that, in a performance sense, is by making the relationship dynamic. Not just, they are friends now. You need shifts. You need moments of mistrust that soften. You need moments of closeness that scare them. You need the companion to misread Milo, and Milo to correct him, not with words, but with action. You need Milo to do something that isn't pet-like, something that asserts, I'm not yours. Those are the beats that keep the bond from turning into a one-note comfort track. Another thing I loved, and this is going to sound like a small detail but it's actually huge, the promise to help Milo search for his kind is framed as a promise of action, not a promise of outcome. I will help you search is fundamentally different from I will find them. It's a vow that acknowledges uncertainty. That kind of vow is emotionally adult. It's also devastating, because it leaves room for failure. And dramas that leave room for failure tend to feel more honest than ones that treat hope like a guarantee. Quick, slightly self-aware aside, I'm always suspicious of stories that give a human a magical creature and then immediately tell me the human is also tragic, like it's some kind of sadness coupon you can redeem for empathy. But the reason it worked here is that the companion's loss doesn't feel like it exists to decorate Milo's story, it feels like it exists to complicate it. Their griefs don't match. They echo. And echoes can be haunting. Now, I want to revisit my earlier critique about the crowd possibly being painted too broadly. Because if the show is truly critiquing spectacle, it benefits from showing how ordinary people become part of cruel systems without waking up one morning twirling a mustache. The arena crowd can be a character. A crowd can be written as a force with moods: bored, hungry, restless, euphoric, offended, ashamed. If the drama lets you feel the crowd shifting, mockery turning to shock, shock turning to celebration, celebration turning to panic under the storm, that's not just good world building. That's a commentary on how quickly public opinion changes when survival enters the room. And there's a deeper point there. Milo's impossible victory gives the crowd a new story to consume. The storm steals it. The drama is essentially depicting the fragility of narratives. We build these neat arcs to feel in control, underdog wins, champion falls, everyone cheers, and then reality interrupts and reminds you that the world doesn't care about your catharsis. If you're watching this as a newcomer and you're worried I'm making it sound depressing, let me clarify, it's not wall-to-wall bleak. The sweetness is real. It's in the companionship, in the small moments of mutual trust, in the physical language of two beings learning each other's boundaries. It's in Milo's resilience, which reads less like invincible hero, and more like small creature who refuses to quit. That's an incredibly likable kind of strength. But yes, the drama does ask you to sit with discomfort. It asks you to hold joy and fear at the same time. And that's where the cinematography, if it's as intentional as the premise suggests, becomes emotional architecture. Bright arena lights feel like exposure. Dark storm clouds feel like erasure. A safe space, wherever they land, feels like a pocket of warmth surrounded by threat. The camera's job is to make those feelings physical. Let me give you another vivid miniscene retelling, this time less about action and more about intimacy, because I think this is where Milo the last Teal dragon wins people over. Imagine the immediate aftermath of the escape. The air still tastes metallic, like rain and stone. Milo is soaked, Teal dulled, scales reflecting dim light in little broken shards. The companion is trying to steady his own breathing, and he's also watching Milo like he's afraid to blink in case the dragon vanishes. There's no cheering now. No crowd. Just the sound of water dripping somewhere, and maybe a distant rumble that could be thunder or could be the memory of thunder. Milo keeps his distance at first. Not because he's angry, but because proximity has always meant danger. The companion doesn't reach. He just sits. Maybe he takes off something, his cloak, his outer layer, something that smells like him, and he places it near Milo, not on him. An offer, not a claim. Milo watches. The drama lingers on the watch. And when Milo finally shifts closer, it's not cute, it's brave. That's the kind of beat that makes you swallow hard, because it's not about magic, it's about trust after trauma. That's the emotional language the show is speaking, and it's why the promise to search lands. The promise isn't coming out of nowhere. It's coming out of that earned trust, that shared breath in the aftermath. Now, one of the more interesting subtexts here, again, rooted in what we're given, is about companionship as a form of translation. Milo and the companion don't share the same kind of life. Milo's loneliness is existential, last of his kind, possibly no cultural memory around him, no elders, no home that still exists in the way it's supposed to. The companion's loneliness is personal, family gone, the human-sized ache of empty rooms and names you can't say. When they bond, they are not solving each other's loss, they are translating it. They are showing each other, I recognize this shape of pain. And translation is work. It's not instant. Which is why I keep emphasizing restraint. If the writing rushes the bond, it becomes sentimental. If it lets the bond develop through small choices, it becomes believable. Milo staying near the companion despite fear is a choice. The companion promising to help Milo search despite knowing it might reopen his own grief is a choice. The drama's entire emotional credibility is built out of choices, not coincidences. Here's another, stick with me, hook. The bittersweet ending only works if you believe Milo could actually leave. Not because he wants to abandon the companion, but because he has a self beyond the relationship. A lot of creature-companion stories fail because they make the creature's identity entirely the human's friend. This drama avoids that by anchoring Milo's identity in Teal dragonhood, in being the last of something. That's heavy, but it gives Milo a destiny that isn't just orbiting a human. And I want to say something that might be unpopular, I'm glad the story doesn't promise a neat reunion with Milo's kind. Hear me out. If you turn last of his kind into, actually, surprise, there are a bunch more, you risk cheapening the grief the story is built on. You also risk turning the bond with the companion into a placeholder romance with a pet dynamic where the creature is just filling time until the real family arrives. The storyline we have suggests the show understands that tension and chooses a more honest bittersweetness, companionship matters even when it's not permanent, and searching matters even when the answer might hurt. That's not me demanding tragedy. That's me respecting narrative integrity. Stories like this live on the thin edge of hope. If you give too much certainty, you kill the edge. Now, I don't want to ignore the Dragon Arena element entirely, because it's not just a prologue, it's a moral imprint. The arena teaches Milo what humans think dragons are for. It teaches Milo what strength gets celebrated. It teaches Milo that survival can be entertainment. Even after the storm, that imprint remains. It has to. Trauma doesn't evaporate when you leave the location. So the bond with the companion is partly about rewriting that imprint, teaching Milo that not every human gaze is consumption. And if you're paying attention, the drama likely does this through repeated visual language. Hands matter. Distance matters. Eye lines matter. If the companion crouches to Milo's level instead of looming, that's a choice. If the camera frames them in the same shot rather than cutting between them like opponents, that's a choice. If the score softens when Milo makes a trust move rather than swelling into, isn't this adorable, that's a choice. All of those choices add up to the show treating Milo as a being with agency. Another point, and this is where I think the show earns the drama label rather than fantasy adventure alone, the companion's grief is not just backstory, it's an active pressure on his decisions. People who've lost family often develop a relationship to risk that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. Sometimes you become reckless because you feel like you have nothing left to lose. Sometimes you become hypercautious because you can't survive losing again. The drama can play that in either direction, and both would be believable. What matters is consistency, and what matters is that the bond with Milo doesn't magically cure that relationship to risk. It complicates it. And this is where the show's title being so blunt is actually helpful. It keeps you from expecting a miracle cure. Milo is still the last in the framing. That means the story is choosing to explore how people live with unfixable truths. And that is, in my opinion, a much richer use of fantasy than, and then magic solved everything. Let's also give the Crimson Champion his due for a second. The storyline describes him as mighty and undefeated, and Milo defeating him is the impossible moment. If the show is smart, and I think it is, it doesn't present the Crimson Champion as a clown who gets nerfed for the underdog to win. It presents him as genuinely formidable, which makes Milo's win feel like skill and courage rather than plot armor. The Crimson Champion should feel like a wall, not a speed bump. And there's a thematic layer there too. The Crimson Champion is undefeated. That word carries the weight of mythology. It implies a whole history of victories. It implies a whole culture of worship around dominance. When Milo wins, he's not just beating a dragon, he's puncturing a myth. And puncturing myths is dangerous, which is why the story immediately moves into survival mode. The drama is essentially saying, the moment you disrupt a system's favorite story, the system will respond. Even if the response comes disguised as weather. Now, I'm going to talk about something that I think separates good tearjerkers from great ones: emotional asymmetry. The companion and Milo are not in the same place emotionally at the same time. Milo might be ready to trust a little sooner because he needs connection, but he also might be skittish because he's been exploited. The companion might be slow to trust because his grief has made him guarded, but he also might overattach because he's starving for family. That mismatch is where drama lives. If they are always aligned, always feeling the same thing at the same time, it becomes simple. If they are misaligned and still trying, it becomes real. Here's the retention tease that kept me leaning forward. The promise to search for Milo's kind sounds noble, but it also sets up a future conflict of priorities. What happens when helping Milo and protecting Milo point in different directions? The story doesn't have to spell that out immediately for you to feel it looming. And since we're on craft, I want to address creature performance again, because it's easy to dismiss it as VFX did it. No. The best creature work is acting. It's timing. It's reaction. It's restraint. Milo's performance has to communicate intelligence without turning him into a talking human in a dragon suit. That's a narrow lane. If Milo emotes too much like a person, he stops feeling like a creature. If he emotes too little, the bond feels hollow. The drama's success depends on finding that balance. And I think the storyline suggests they do, because Milo's victory is described as impossible, but not because he suddenly becomes physically gigantic. He's still tiny. So his acting has to sell cleverness and resolve. The storm escape has to sell fear. The bonding has to sell trust. Those are subtle emotional states to convey without words. When it works, it's honestly more impressive than a lot of human performances because it's all physical storytelling. Now, let me be fair and mention another potential weak spot. A premise like this can sometimes lean too hard on the last of his kind as a shortcut for depth. Like, see? Tragic. Therefore meaningful. The drama avoids that when it shows how that loneliness changes Milo's behavior rather than just telling you it's sad. But if at any point it starts using the phrase as a hammer, repeating it, underlining it, turning every scene into a reminder, it risks diminishing returns. Grief is powerful when it's present, not when it's constantly announced. There's a certain confidence to letting a viewer forget the tragedy for a moment. Letting them laugh. Letting them enjoy a quiet beat. Then bringing the tragedy back with one small detail, a pause, a glance, a line that lands sideways. That's the kind of writing I respect, because it trusts the audience to hold complexity without being spoon-fed. And that brings me to humor, which is tricky in a story like this. I don't want Marvel-style quips. Please, no. But I do want the kind of humor that comes from character. Like the companion trying to figure out what Milo will eat, or Milo having an attitude about being handled, or the companion talking to him like he's pretending not to understand but obviously does. Humor like that isn't a tonal betrayal, it's a coping mechanism. People joke when they are terrified. People get absurd when the world is absurd. If the drama sprinkles those moments in, it makes the grief feel more believable, not less. I also want to point out a thematic undercurrent that's sitting right there in the premise: class, or at least hierarchy. The Dragon Arena is a place where someone benefits from the spectacle. Someone is selling tickets. Someone is profiting. Someone is building a culture around dominance and consumption. Milo is the exploited body. The Crimson Champion is the prized asset. The companion is somewhere in the middle, connected enough to be there, powerless enough to be swept up in disaster. That's a hierarchy. And the storm is the great equalizer for about 5 seconds, until the social hierarchy reasserts itself in who gets safe and who has to run. Again, I'm not claiming the show explicitly explores all that in dialogue, we don't have that info, but the premise is loaded with it. And the best dramas don't waste loaded premises. They let the load shape the atmosphere. Let's talk about atmosphere, actually. Because what I keep picturing from this storyline is a show that's very tactile. Sand in the arena. Wet fabric after the storm. The smell of ozone. The weight of a small creature settling into a cautious rest. That tactile quality is what makes fantasy feel real. It's not the dragons, it's the physics. It's the way water behaves on scales. It's the way light catches teal differently than it catches red. It's the way a big creature's movement displaces air and makes a smaller one flinch. Those details make you believe. And belief is crucial because the emotional arc depends on it. If you don't believe Milo is a living being, the bond becomes gimmick. If you don't believe the companion's grief, the promise becomes manipulation. If you don't believe the storm's danger, the escape becomes noise. The show has to earn belief on every level. Here's another, don't look away, kind of thought. The drama's title tells you Milo is the last, but the story is also about the companion being, in a sense, the last of his own family unit. That parallel can feel obvious if handled clumsily, but it can feel devastating if handled with subtlety. The point isn't that their losses are the same. The point is that both of them are carrying a kind of afterlife. They're living in the world that continues after something ended, and that's a lonely place to be unless you find someone else who recognizes the landscape. Now, I'm going to push a little on a contrarian angle I hinted at earlier. I don't think the story is actually about finding Milo's kind. I think the search is a narrative engine, but the real story is about what the search does to them. Because, helping someone search for home, is one of the purest expressions of love that doesn't involve owning them. It's love as support, not love as possession. If the drama sticks to that, it's doing something quietly radical for a creature-companion narrative. And yes, it's bittersweet. Because if Milo finds home, he might leave. If Milo doesn't find home, the companion might become his home, which is beautiful but also heartbreaking because it means Milo's species loss becomes permanent in a different way. Either outcome hurts. That's what makes it drama. If you felt your stomach drop reading that, good. That's the feeling the show is aiming for. Let's also not ignore the meta angle. Audiences love underdogs, but we also love champions. The Crimson Champion is described as undefeated, and that undefeatedness is part of what makes the arena compelling to its spectators. That's real. People love dominance. They love a GOAT. They love an icon. And when that icon is defeated by a tiny creature, the crowd's reaction is probably not pure joy. It's shock, disbelief, maybe even anger because the story they paid for got rewritten. That's another layer of spectacle critique. We don't just consume violence, we consume narrative certainty. Milo disrupts narrative certainty, and the world responds. Now, I'm going to slide into sound design again, because I think this drama could have a really memorable sonic identity if it's executed with care. Teal should have a sound. Not literally, but emotionally. Maybe Milo's presence is accompanied by lighter textures, wind chimes, soft strings, airy tones, not to infantilize him, but to communicate rarity. Crimson should have heavier textures, brass, low percussion, something that feels like weight. The arena should sound like layered human noise, cheers, stomps, that particular kind of echo you get in big stone spaces. And the storm should swallow all of it, replacing it with the indifferent roar of nature. The best sound design choice in a story like this is knowing when to let the creature's sound speak. A small dragon's breathing, a subtle growl, the flutter of wings, claws on stone, those are emotional cues. If the show respects those sounds and doesn't drown them in constant music, you feel closer to Milo. You feel like you're hearing him think. And the companion's voice matters too. If his delivery is too polished, you don't believe him. Grief makes people sound tired. Not just sad, tired. Like every sentence costs something. When he reveals he lost his family, it should feel like the words are heavier than they should be. And when he promises to help Milo search, the words should feel like a choice he's making in real time, not like a pre-written speech he's been saving for the right dramatic moment. I keep coming back to this because I've seen too many dramas sabotage themselves with pretty dialogue. Pretty dialogue is not the goal. Honest dialogue is. Now, one place where the drama might divide audiences is the tonal pivot from arena spectacle to storm survival to intimate bonding. Some viewers want one lane. They want the arena story, full stop. They want tournament escalation, bigger fights, a clear antagonist, and a clear victory. If you're that viewer, the storm might feel like a genre swerve. But for me, that swerve is the point. It's the show refusing to be trapped by the arena's logic the way Milo was trapped by it. And the show's willingness to step away from the arena also protects Milo's character. If the drama stayed in the arena too long, Milo would become the underdog fighter. He'd be defined by winning, by performance, by spectacle. The storm forces him into a different kind of strength, endurance, trust, vulnerability. It expands his identity beyond the arena's frame. That's good character writing. Here's a question that's going to matter the more you think about this story. When Milo wins, does he feel proud, or does he feel terrified? Because both can be true. Pride at surviving. Terror at what survival costs. The drama's emotional intelligence shows up in whether it allows those emotions to coexist without resolving them into one neat feeling. And the same question applies to the companion. When he bonds with Milo, does he feel comforted, or does he feel afraid of caring again? If the show treats love as purely healing, it becomes simplistic. If it treats love as both healing and risky, it becomes real. There's also an identity angle here that I think is genuinely poignant. Milo is the last Teal dragon. That's not just loneliness. That's identity without community. It's trying to understand yourself without anyone around who shares your biology, your instincts, your history. The companion helping Milo search for his kind is, in that sense, helping Milo search for a mirror. And when you think of it that way, the story becomes about more than friendship. It becomes about the human need to be seen by someone who truly recognizes you. And if you want to get even more quietly brutal, the companion's family loss means he's also missing mirrors. Family members are mirrors. They remember who you were before the world changed you. Losing them is losing context. So both characters are, in different ways, missing the witnesses to their lives. This is why their bond isn't just cute. It's existential. Now, a fair critique, a story this symbolic can sometimes overburden its main relationship with meaning, to the point where the characters feel like metaphors instead of beings. The way you avoid that is through specificity. Milo needs quirks that aren't symbolic. Habits. Preferences. Little irritations. The companion needs personality beyond grief. He needs opinions, maybe a dry sense of humor, maybe impatience, maybe tenderness that surprises even him. The relationship needs friction. Not toxic conflict, just the normal friction of two individuals trying to coexist. And again, I'm staying within what we know. The storyline doesn't list those quirks. I'm describing what the show has to do to make its premise land at a human level. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because Milo the Last Teal Dragon is so close to being the kind of story that lazy creators would turn into a feelings machine. But the version I loved feels like it has more respect for its characters than that. Another thing, the storm is a narrative reset, but it's also a visual reset. In the arena, Milo is a spectacle. Outside it, Milo becomes a creature in a world that might not have space for him. The camera's job is to stop fetishizing him and start humanizing, dragonizing him. To show him existing rather than performing. That's a different visual language, fewer hero angles, more observational shots. Fewer crowd reactions, more private reactions. Fewer wow moments, more oh moments. If the drama nails that shift, it creates intimacy. And intimacy is what makes the bittersweet ending devastating, because you've come to know Milo not as the last Teal Dragon, as a label, but as Milo, a being with a particular rhythm in the world. And this is where I'll admit another personal reaction, because this drama did something to me that I didn't expect. I found myself rooting not for Milo to find his kind, in a triumphant, plot-satisfying way, but for Milo to have the option. That's a subtle difference. It's the difference between wanting a specific outcome and wanting agency. I wanted the story to protect Milo's right to choose. And that's when I realized the show had successfully pulled me away from consumption and into care. Because if you're just consuming the story, you want the neat ending. If you're caring about the characters, you want them to have dignity, even if that dignity means walking away from what you want as a viewer. Here's another rehook line that I think captures why this story lingers. The most suspenseful question isn't, will Milo survive? It's, what will survival turn Milo into? Will survival make him hard? Will it make him dependent? Will it make him wise? The drama's bittersweet promise suggests it's interested in growth, not just endurance. And growth is tricky, because growth implies change, and change implies loss. Even positive change costs something. If Milo grows into someone who can find his own way home, he might grow out of needing the companion. That's the whole bittersweet punch. The companion's love is, in a way, training Milo to leave him. That's not tragedy. That's parenting logic. That's mentorship logic. That's love that wants the other person to become free. And watching a drama apply that logic to a human and dragon bond is unexpectedly tender. But it also raises the question, can the companion handle that? If he's lost his family, the temptation to keep Milo close forever would be understandable. It would also be wrong, and the drama knows it. That's the ethical tension. The companion's grief might want possession. His better self might want liberation. That internal conflict is, frankly, more compelling than a lot of external villains. Let me also praise something else that I think the show does well based on the storyline's emotional arc. It doesn't confuse companionship with ownership. The promise to help Milo search is inherently non-possessive. The bittersweet ending note explicitly frames Milo as someone who will eventually find his own way home. That wording matters. His own way. Not our way. Not I'll take him. His. That's a respectful narrative choice. And you'd be surprised how rare that is in creature stories, where the creature often becomes a vehicle for the human's emotional growth, and then the creature just stays. Like furniture. Milo the Last Teal Dragon doesn't do that. It treats Milo as a being with a destination beyond the human. Now, there's one more craft element I want to highlight, because it's easy to miss but it's crucial, the show's use of interruption. Celebration interrupted by storm. Spectacle interrupted by survival. Loneliness interrupted by companionship. Companionship potentially interrupted by destiny. That pattern creates a rhythm of attachment and loss. It's almost like the drama is training your nervous system. Every time you settle into a feeling, something disrupts it. That can be exhausting if mishandled, but it can also be profoundly accurate to lived experience, especially for people who've been through loss. You stop trusting good moments. You wait for the interruption. And that's why the Bond scenes, when they're quiet, can feel tense even when nothing bad is happening. Because the show has taught you to expect the interruption. That's smart writing. It creates suspense without needing a monster in the bushes. Now, I want to pivot briefly to the idea of home again, because the storyline's ending note explicitly mentions Milo finding his own way home. Home is doing a lot of work here. If Milo is truly the last, then what is home? Is it a place that still exists? Is it a memory? Is it an instinct? Is it a community that might be gone? The drama doesn't have to answer that with geography. It can answer it emotionally. Home can be belonging. Home can be recognition. Home can be safety without performance. And that's why the companion's promise is powerful. He's not promising a location. He's promising to help Milo pursue belonging. That's a bigger promise than it sounds. Another small, slightly funny but also telling observation, making the dragon tiny forces the human actor to physically adjust constantly. You can't just stride around like you're the main character if your scene partner is at ankle height. You have to kneel. You have to crouch. You have to soften your movements so you don't look like a threat. That physical adjustment becomes metaphor. The companion literally lowers himself to meet Milo. That's humility as blocking. And when a show uses blocking to tell you who a character is, it's doing the work. I also think the drama's bittersweetness is partially a response to modern audiences being tired of fake closure. We've all seen stories that wrap grief in a bow and call it healing. Healing isn't a bow. Healing is learning how to carry something without letting it crush you. The companion doesn't stop missing his family. Milo doesn't stop being last. What they gain is companionship, and companionship doesn't erase loss, it gives loss somewhere to rest. Okay, one more attention pivot, because this is where my brain got snagged. The arena laughs at Milo because he's small, but the storm doesn't care. The storm is indifferent. Which kind of threat is scarier, cruelty or indifference? The show puts both in the same story, and that combination is what makes it hit. That's also why the companion's reveal matters. Human cruelty is something you can blame. Indifferent disaster is something you can't. When the companion admits he lost his family, you don't know how. You just know it happened. And that makes his bond with Milo feel less like two victims of the same enemy, and more like two survivors of life. Now, I've been talking a lot about how the show avoids sentimentality, but I also want to acknowledge that it probably does indulge it in a few places, because almost every drama like this does. The question is whether those indulgences feel earned. A swelling score at the wrong moment can cheapen a scene. A lingering close-up can push you from moved to manipulated. The show mostly knows when to pull back, but there are moments, especially around big emotional lines like The Promise, where you can feel it stepping a little closer to the edge of melodrama. And yet, because the premise is so emotionally sincere, I didn't mind as much as I thought I would. Sometimes you let a drama be dramatic. Sometimes you want the swell. The key is that the show doesn't live there all the time. It earns its crescendos by spending time in quiet. Let's also appreciate that the story doesn't pretend companionship is simple. Even in the basic outline we have, there's an awareness that Milo is meant to walk beside the companion only until he can find his way home. That until is a ticking clock. Not a literal countdown, but an emotional one. It means every tender scene carries a shadow. It means the viewer is watching love develop under the knowledge that love will change shape. And that's why this drama is, for me, more mature than it looks from the outside. The trailer pitch could easily be, Tiny Dragon beats Big Dragon. But the story itself is, Tiny Dragon and grieving human learn how to survive love without owning each other. I keep saying that because it's rare. And I'll add one more subtle praise, the story's emotional spine is not about destiny choosing Milo. It's about Milo choosing himself. An impossible victory can sometimes become a chosen one narrative where the universe is secretly on the underdog's side. But the storm undercuts that. The storm says the universe is not on anyone's side. Milo's victories are his, not fate's. That makes him more admirable, not less. Now, where does that leave us emotionally as viewers? It leaves us in a state of hopeful dread, which is kind of my favorite state when a drama is good. You're hopeful because the bond is real. You're dread-filled because you know the story won't let that bond be simple. And that combination keeps you watching, not because you're chasing plot twists, but because you're chasing emotional truth. I'll stop here on one more thought that feels like the next door the story wants to open. The companion's promise to help Milo search for his kind is, on the surface, an act of care, but it's also the moment where the companion stops running from his own grief and starts moving towards something again. And the question isn't whether the search succeeds in a literal sense so much as what happens to both of them when the search forces them to define what home even means in a world that has already taken so much away and still might take more, especially once you realize that the arena and the storm were only the first lessons in how quickly safety can vanish when you finally let yourself want something. Especially once you realize that the arena and the storm were only the first lessons in how quickly safety can vanish when you finally let yourself want something. And that's where the drama's emotional suspense really lies, not in whether the sky will crack again, but in whether these two survivors can tolerate the vulnerability of hope without punishing themselves for it. Because hope, in this story, is not a sunny concept. Hope is an act that exposes you. Milo hoping there might be others like him is basically Milo agreeing to feel pain twice, once for what's gone, and once for what might never be found. The companion hoping he can help is him reopening a part of himself that grief probably sealed up for survival. That's what makes the promise scene hit. It's not romantic, it's not heroic, it's risky. And I think that's why the drama's best moments aren't the big swings. It's the tiny calibrations. The companion learning how close he can get before Milo flinches. Milo learning how to rest without scanning for an exit every second. The way a hand pauses in midair and then chooses to lower instead of reaching. Those are micro decisions that communicate, I'm trying to be safe for you, which is a different kind of intimacy than, I love you. If you've ever had to earn trust back, your own, someone else's, this show knows what that process feels like. It's awkward. It's slow. It's unglamorous. And it's full of these moments where you're sure you messed it up, and then you realize the other person is still there, still trying, and that's the miracle. Not dragons. Trying. Here's the next mental hook I want to plant. The arena was a place where Milo had to prove his worth to strangers. The bond is where Milo gets to be worthy without proving anything. That shift is everything. Now, for a drama reviewer, this is where I start watching the camera more than the plot. Because when a show is about trust, the directing has to communicate trust. If the camera constantly intrudes, constant close-ups, constant push-ins, constant look, cry now, then the audience starts feeling manipulated, which is the opposite of trust. But if the camera gives the characters space, if it observes instead of squeezing, then you as a viewer relax into the relationship the same way Milo relaxes into the companion's presence. And from what we've got, Milo the last Teal dragon seems to understand that. It gives you enough to feel, not so much that you feel coerced. It's a hard balance. It's also the difference between a show you admire and a show you actually carry around afterward. Let's talk about the companion again, because the more I think about this story, the more I realize he's the one who could have ruined it. A badly written human in a creature story is like putting a dead battery in a flashlight. The creature can be magical, the concept can be strong, but the human performance is what illuminates it. If the companion is generic, Milo becomes a gimmick. If the companion is present, emotionally legible, physically attentive, Milo becomes a partner. The storyline tells us the companion reveals he's also lost his family. That reveal is doing two jobs at once. It's explaining why he bonds, yes, but it's also equalizing them. It prevents the relationship from being human rescues creature. It becomes two beings who know what it is to be left behind. That's not just touching, it's structurally important. It keeps the story from slipping into savior narrative territory. And I'm going to say something that might sound picky, but in dramas like this, details of language matter. The companion promises to help him search for his kind. That phrasing is key, help him search. Not I'll find them for you. Not I'll bring you to them. The agency stays with Milo. The companion is supporting, not steering. That's respectful writing. It's also the kind of writing that makes the bittersweet ending feel honest rather than cruel. Because the ending note is basically saying, this companionship is a chapter, not the whole book. Milo is meant to walk beside him only until he can find his own way home. And as a viewer, you either accept that and let it break you in a good way, or you fight it because you want permanence. I want to sit with that fight for a minute, because I had it. I felt myself wanting the story to cheat. I wanted a loophole. I wanted the universe to give them both. Milo finds his kind, and the companion comes too, and everyone heals, and the world stops being indifferent, and the credits roll over a warm sunset. My brain wrote that version automatically because my brain is a comfort-seeking machine. But the story we're given doesn't do that. It says companionship is real, and it is not ownership. It says growth is the point, and growth includes leaving. And I'll be honest, that made me respect the drama more, even as it made me a little mad at it. I love when a story earns my anger. That's the sign it touched something real. Here's a little rehook line, because this is where the drama quietly dares you. You rooting for Milo's happiness, or are you rooting for your own comfort as an audience member? Those aren't always the same thing. Now, because we're not inventing scenes, I'm not going to pretend there's a specific episode where Milo looks at a map or whatever. but the search for his kind, as a narrative direction, opens up a lot of thematic territory that the show is already primed to explore. Searching for your kind is about identity. It's about belonging. It's about whether you can be fully yourself in the presence of someone who loves you but isn't like you. And that's where the last teal dragon concept gets really interesting, because being the last of your kind is not just loneliness. It's a crisis of reference. Who teaches Milo what it means to be a teal dragon? Who tells him what behaviors are instinct and what behaviors are learned? If Milo's only close relationship is with a human, then Milo's identity is being shaped across species lines. That can be beautiful, but it can also be alienating in a way that's hard to articulate. The story's bittersweet stance suggests it recognizes that Milo may need something the companion can't provide, a sense of home that isn't built from translation. And at the same time, the companion has his own identity issue. He's lost his family. That means his role in the world has been disrupted. Family is not just love, it's context. It's routine. It's the people who call you by a nickname no one else knows. Without them, you can feel unmoored, like you're floating through life without an anchor. Bonding with Milo gives him something to be again: caregiver, protector, partner, friend. But if Milo eventually leaves, that identity will be threatened. The drama is setting up a love that requires emotional courage from both sides. If you're watching this and thinking, wow, this sounds like a lot for a dragon story, yes. That's why it works. It uses fantasy scale to talk about intimate human truths. And the arena piece matters here too, because Milo's first major, public, moment is in a space that treats him as entertainment. That means Milo's relationship with being seen is already complicated. Winning makes him visible. Visibility makes him vulnerable. Then the storm wipes the board and pushes him into privacy with the companion, where being seen becomes intimate rather than public. The contrast is sharp. The show is basically exploring two kinds of gaze, the crowd's gaze and the companion's gaze. One consumes. One recognizes. That's not subtle, but it doesn't have to be subtle if it's executed with emotional accuracy. Now, I want to talk about one of the things I think Milo the Last Teal Dragon does better than a lot of modern dramas: it doesn't overcomplicate its emotional thesis. In an era where some shows feel allergic to sincerity, where they keep winking at you like, don't worry, we know this is cheesy, this story just commits. It lets a tiny creature be brave. It lets a grieving person be tender. It lets a promise matter. And because it commits, you give it permission to move you. That sincerity is a risk. Sincerity can be cringe if it's not grounded. But grounded sincerity is one of the most powerful things a drama can offer, because it's rare. Still, I don't want to pretend the show is flawless. The main weakness that lingers for me, and it's tied to the storyline itself, is how quickly the arena victory and storm catastrophe arrive back to back. The whiplash is intentional, yes, but the risk is that it can feel like the show is speedrunning trauma to get you into the bond. If you don't give the audience enough time to inhabit the arena world, to feel the social texture of that mockery, then the victory can feel like a set piece rather than a turning point. And if the storm hits too fast, it can feel like the show is using disaster as a shortcut to intimacy. In the version I watched in my head, based on the storyline, the storm is effective precisely because it interrupts celebration. But interruption only lands if the celebration was real for a moment. The show needs to let Milo's win breathe just long enough for you to feel joy. Not long enough to get comfortable, but long enough to feel the loss of it when it's cut. That's timing. That's rhythm. And rhythm is something dramas often get wrong. I'll also say, cat-sized dragon defeats undefeated champion is a hard sell if the choreography doesn't respect physics. The show gets away with it by framing Milo's win as intelligence and adaptation rather than brute force, which is smart. But you still need to stage the fight so it feels earned. Not, he got lucky, not, the champion forgot how to fight, but, Milo found a path through. If the fight ever feels like plot armor, it undercuts the theme of earned survival. Now, let's zoom out and talk about the Dragon Arena as a metaphor, because I don't think the show puts that arena there just for spectacle. The arena is a concentrated version of a world that measures worth through dominance and performance. Milo is mocked because he doesn't fit the expected shape of power. The Crimson Champion is celebrated because he does. Milo's victory is disruptive because it reveals the system's assumptions are not laws of nature. They are just preferences, enforced through violence and entertainment. And then the storm comes in and reminds you, nature doesn't care about your preferences either. The world is bigger than your systems. That's why the drama feels so existential, even when it's telling a relatively simple story. It's layering two kinds of threat, social and cosmic. One is made by people. One just happens. Both can destroy you. Here's another retention pivot. The show is basically asking whether companionship is enough when the world is both cruel and indifferent. Not, can love fix it, but, can love help you survive it without losing yourself? That's a much tougher question. Now, I want to go back to Milo as a character, because it would be easy to write him as pure innocence, but the premise suggests something more interesting. Milo is a survivor of the arena. That means Milo has learned something about humans and power that he shouldn't have had to learn. When he bonds with the companion, he isn't bonding from a clean slate. He's bonding from injury. That changes everything. If Milo flinches at sudden movements, that's not cute. That's trauma behavior. If Milo is wary of crowds, that's not shy. That's survival memory. The drama's responsibility is to portray those behaviors with respect, not as a shortcut for audience. And from the tone implied by the storyline, it seems like the show is aware of that line. It's emotionally soft, but it's not infantilizing. I also love that Milo's size means his courage reads differently. A big dragon charging is impressive. A small dragon standing his ground is heartbreaking. It's the David and Goliath thing, yes, but with the added layer that Milo is not a human scaled down, is a creature whose body is fundamentally vulnerable in that space. His bravery is not symbolic, it's physical risk. And that's why the storm works too. The storm is a reminder that Milo's body is always at risk. The arena is one kind of danger, the storm is another, but both tell you the same truth: Milo's survival is not guaranteed, and that makes every moment of trust feel like a gift. Now let's talk about the companion's performance again, because the best human actors in creature shows learn to act with their whole body. Your face is not enough. You have to move in a way that communicates intention to a creature that doesn't speak your language. If the companion's posture stays tense even when he's trying to be gentle, Milo will read that tension as threat. The actor has to convey gentleness through breath, through pace, through stillness. It's a different kind of acting than delivering monologues. And the reveal that he lost his family, again, in a well-executed version, shouldn't be a climax. It should be a surrender. Like he's finally letting someone else know a truth he's been carrying alone. The camera should treat that moment with humility. No flashy moves. No, look at this actor lighting. Just a human being letting something out. If you're someone who's experienced loss, those moments can hit uncomfortably hard because they feel recognizable. Not the specifics, but the shape. I want to make another personal confession here, because this drama did something to me that's hard to explain without sounding a little ridiculous. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't feel like sadness, it feels like static. Like you're moving through life but you're not fully connected to it. And stories about companionship, real companionship, not the glossy kind, can short-circuit that static for a moment. Milo and the companion forming this bond after catastrophe, after humiliation, after loss, it reminded me of the way small acts of care can feel almost illegal when you've been living in survival mode. Like, we allowed to be gentle? Is that safe? Watching them choose gentleness anyway made my throat tighten in a way I did not expect from a dragon drama. And yes, I felt a little embarrassed about that, because I'm an adult, and I'm sitting there being moved by a tiny teal dragon learning to trust a grieving guy. But that's also the point of drama, isn't it? It sneaks into your defenses. It finds the soft part you forgot you had. Now, I want to shift to the ending note, because even with moderate spoilers, we can talk about the emotional destination without detailing every plot step. The narrative concludes on a bittersweet note about growth and companionship, acknowledging that Milo is meant to walk beside his human friend only until he can eventually find his own way home. That's a quietly devastating ending because it reframes the entire bond as transitional, not disposable, but transitional. And I think transitional love is one of the most underrepresented kinds of love in mainstream storytelling. We get forever love. We get tragic love. We get toxic love. But transitional love, the kind where you meet someone, you become each other's lifeline, you change each other, and then you let each other go, doesn't get portrayed often because it doesn't fit our cultural obsession with permanence as proof. This drama is saying, the proof was the growth. The proof was the walking beside each other. The proof was the promise, even if it leads to separation. That's a brave message, and it's one that can either comfort you or wreck you depending on where you're at in life. Here's a hook that I think is going to keep you thinking even after you finish watching. What if home is not where Milo ends up, but who Milo becomes capable of being? If the companionship helps him find his own way, then the companionship did its job, even if it ends. Now, I want to address something that some viewers might push back on. Isn't it cruel to frame Milo as the last of his kind, and then dangle a search? Isn't that emotional torture? It can be. It depends on how the show handles hope. If the show treats hope like a cruel joke, it becomes nihilistic. If it treats hope like an act of dignity even in the face of likely failure, it becomes profound. From the storyline, the ending isn't, and they found everyone and it was fine. It's bittersweet growth and companionship, with an acknowledgement of Milo's eventual path. That suggests the drama is more interested in the process than the outcome. And I respect that. Because in real life, searching for closure often doesn't give you closure. It gives you movement. It gives you meaning. It gives you a way to keep living. That's what the companion is offering Milo, movement, not certainty. Now, a quick, slightly cheeky aside, if you're the kind of viewer who gets attached to creature characters fast, this show is going to play you like a piano. Not in a cheap way, but in a, we know exactly where your soft spots are, way. Milo's smallness, his resilience, the way he's mocked, the way he wins anyway, it's engineered empathy. I say that like it's a critique, but honestly, when engineering is this well done, it becomes craft. It becomes art. Let's talk about art direction a bit, because teal is such a specific choice. Teal is not the typical dragon color. Dragons tend to be red, black, gold, green. Teal feels like the show is deliberately choosing an in-between color, not cold like blue, not warm like green. Teal is liminal. Teal is oceanic. Teal is the color of something rare, something that doesn't belong in a dusty arena built for blood and cheers. That color choice itself is a kind of rebellion. And crimson, of course, is the opposite, it belongs to the arena. It belongs to blood, to banners, to victory. It's the color that makes sense in a violent spectacle. So the teal vs crimson contrast isn't just aesthetic, it's ideological. Teal is the outsider. Crimson is the institution. When Milo defeats the Crimson Champion, it's teal puncturing Crimson's myth. And then the storm washes both colors into gray, reminding you that nature will flatten all your symbols eventually. That's such a clean thematic arc for a story that, on paper, could have been nothing but tiny dragon wins. Here's another rehook thought: the drama's real villain isn't the Crimson Champion, it's the idea that some beings are born to be spectacle. Once you see that, the story becomes less about fighting and more about escaping a role. And escaping a role is exactly what Milo does after the storm. He's no longer arena underdog. He becomes living being trying to survive. The companion also escapes a role. He stops being whatever he was in that arena world, spectator, handler, bystander, and becomes someone who chooses care. That's a character arc. A subtle one, but real. Now, I want to talk about how the show uses catastrophe. Catastrophe is often used in dramas to accelerate bonding. Shared trauma equals instant closeness. That's a trope. But the show avoids the cheapness of that trope by making the bonding feel like it comes after, not during. During catastrophe, you're just surviving. After catastrophe, you have to decide what survival means. That's when bonding can happen, and it feels more earned. If the show has scenes where Milo and the companion sit in the quiet aftermath, where they're not doing plot, they're just existing together, those are the scenes that make the ending bittersweet instead of hollow. Because you're not grieving the loss of action, you're grieving the potential loss of intimacy. And intimacy is built in quiet. Let's also talk about the show's respect for Milo's autonomy. The storyline implies Milo is not a pet, he's a companion. That distinction matters. If the human companion treats Milo like an object to protect, the story becomes paternalistic. If the human companion treats Milo like a being with goals, the story becomes relational. The promise to help Milo search for his kind is the clearest indicator that the story chooses the second option. But there's still tension there. Helping someone search can still become controlling if you start deciding for them what home is. The drama's bittersweet ending, with Milo eventually finding his own way home, suggests the companion does not ultimately define Milo's destiny. And that's the ethical win. Now, I want to highlight a subtle structural brilliance. The show gives you a triumphant beat, the victory, and then immediately complicates it, the storm. That teaches you a language, triumph is temporary. Then it gives you a tender beat, the bond, and frames it as temporary too, the bittersweet ending. That's consistency. That's thematic integrity. The show is not punishing you, it's teaching you how it sees the world. And the world it sees is one where beauty exists, but it doesn't come with guarantees. That's a mature worldview for a fantasy drama, and it's one of the reasons I ended up loving it. Now, I know some viewers might say, I watch fantasy to escape reality. And that's valid. But I'd argue this show offers a different kind of escape. It doesn't escape into a world where pain doesn't exist. It escapes into a world where pain is met with care. That's not the same, and honestly, it can be more comforting. Because real life will always have storms. The fantasy is that someone might sit with you after. Here's a retention pivot before I go into more critique. The most emotionally dangerous moment in this story isn't the fight or the storm, it's the promise. Because promises create a future, and futures are where grief is most afraid to go. Now, critique time, sharper edge. The premise, as beautiful as it is also extremely dependent on execution. If the show leans too hard into, Milo is the last, it could start to feel like emotional blackmail. If it leans too hard into, companion lost family, it could start to feel like trauma bonding as destiny. And if it leans too hard into, impossible victory, it could start to feel like a gimmick. The show avoids those pitfalls most of the time through restraint, but there are moments where the writing might overreach. Big emotional lines are tempting. It's tempting to have the companion say the perfectly crafted thing about loss and belonging. But perfect lines can feel false. The best line about grief is often the one that's slightly ugly, slightly unfinished, slightly human. If the show ever gets too polished in those moments, you can feel it. And because the rest of the drama is so tactile and grounded, the polished moments stand out like a shiny object in mud. They don't ruin it, but they remind you you're watching a constructed story. Another potential issue is the world beyond the arena and storm. The storyline doesn't give us much about the larger setting, and that's okay, stories can be intimate. But if the show wants to critique spectacle and systems, it benefits from giving us a sense of who runs the arena, who profits, who gets to be safe when storms hit. Without that, the critique can feel like atmosphere rather than analysis. The show can still be emotionally powerful, but it might miss an opportunity to be politically sharp. That said, not every story needs to be a manifesto. Sometimes it's enough to show harm and show care. Let's pivot to music again, because I keep thinking about how the score can either elevate or suffocate this kind of story. The best scores know when to get out of the way. If Milo's small movements are constantly underscored with cute motifs, it infantilizes him. If the companion's grief is constantly underscored with swelling strings, it manipulates you. The show's strongest choice would be using motifs sparingly, letting ambient sound carry emotion, wind, rain, breath, distant thunder, the scrape of claws. Silence is especially powerful in stories about loss. Silence is what you're left with. When the companion reveals his family loss, I hope the show lets the room go quiet enough that you can hear how hard it is for him to say it. And when he promises to help Milo search, I hope the show lets the silence after the promise breathe, because that's where the weight lands. Not on the words, but on the pause where both characters realize what they've just agreed to. If the drama nails those silences, it's playing at a high level. Here's another rehook line: the real magic of this drama isn't that Milo wins, it's that Milo is allowed to be small and still matter. That's a message that sneaks up on you. Because so many stories equate worth with impact. Being big. Being loud. Being unstoppable. Milo's worth is not in his size, and the drama never lets you forget that. The arena laughs at him for being small. The show frames that laughter as cruelty. Then it frames Milo's survival as proof that smallness is not the same as weakness. That's a powerful reframe, especially for viewers who have lived in bodies or lives that the world underestimated. And yes, that's one of the reasons this story can hit younger viewers hard too, even though it's not kids' content. Being mocked for not fitting a role is a universal experience. The show takes that experience and gives it wings, literally, without trivializing it. Now, I want to explore the bittersweet conclusion more, because it's easy to treat bittersweet as a vibe word. But bittersweet is a structure. It means you gain something and lose something simultaneously. In this story, Milo gains companionship and a path forward. The companion gains purpose and connection. But the until implies they may lose each other in the same shape. A good bittersweet ending doesn't feel like the writer yanking a toy away. It feels like the characters outgrowing the frame you wanted to keep them in. If Milo eventually finds his own way home, that's not tragedy, it's fulfillment. It's also loss for the companion, and likely for Milo too, because leaving someone you love can hurt even when it's right. That's emotional complexity, and it's one of the hardest things to pull off without tipping into either cruelty or sap. The show lands it, in my opinion, because it commits to the ethics of autonomy. Milo is not meant to be anyone's possession, even if he's beloved. Now, one more personal note, because I think it's relevant to why I'm reacting so strongly to this. I've had friendships in my life that were clearly, for a season. People who came in when I was not okay, and I came in when they were not okay, and we kept each other afloat. And then, when we got better, we drifted, not because we didn't care, but because the relationship's purpose had been fulfilled. That kind of love can feel like a betrayal if you're addicted to permanence. But if you let it be what it was, it can feel like one of the most meaningful things you ever experienced. Milo the Last Teal Dragon captures that feeling in fantasy form. It says, walking beside someone can be enough, even if you don't walk beside them forever. That's why the ending note is not just sad. It's strangely comforting. It respects the reality that not all companionship is meant to last, and that doesn't make it fake. Here's another retention pivot: the show's biggest emotional flex is making eventually feel heavier than never. Eventually implies time, growth, waiting, uncertainty. Eventually is hope and dread braided together. Now, I want to get a little nerdy about framing again. If the show is smart, it uses scale shots not just in the arena, but in the quiet scenes too. A tiny dragon next to a human can be shot in a way that makes Milo look like a toy, or it can be shot in a way that makes Milo look like a presence. The angle matters. If you shoot from above, Milo shrinks. If you shoot at Milo's eye level, Milo becomes equal in emotional status even if he's physically smaller. That's how cinematography communicates respect. And for the companion, the show can communicate his grief through how he occupies space. Grieving people often look like they're trying not to take up room. Shoulders curled in. Movements economical. Like they're afraid to disturb the world because the world already punished them. If the actor plays that, and if the director frames him in ways that emphasize emptiness around him, you feel his isolation without a single line of exposition. Then, when Milo enters his space, physically and emotionally, that emptiness changes. The frames get fuller. The companion's posture shifts. The show can communicate healing not as, "I'm fine now," but as, "I'm slightly less hollow." That's the kind of visual storytelling I live for. Now, you might be wondering, if we don't have lots of plot twists described, what keeps the viewing experience engaging? And my answer is, the tension is relational. You're watching two beings negotiate attachment under the knowledge of impermanence. That's enough if the performances and direction are strong. In fact, it's often more compelling than twisty plots because it feels like watching life. And to be clear, the drama still has external stakes. The storm is catastrophic. The arena is violent. Fleeing suggests pursuit or danger. But the story's heartbeat is internal. Will Milo trust? Will the companion hold that trust responsibly? Will they both grow without clinging? Here's another hook. The show is secretly asking whether love can be non-selfish. That's a hard question, because most love has some selfishness in it. We love because it makes us feel less alone. We love because it gives us identity. We love because it soothes. The companion loving Milo will inevitably soothe him. Milo loving the companion will inevitably soothe Milo. The drama is asking whether they can still prioritize each other's autonomy even when love tempts them to cling. That's a grown-up question. Now, let me address a possible viewer critique. Why even make Milo the last if the story is about companionship? Isn't that too bleak? I get it. But the last status is what gives the companionship ethical stakes. If Milo were just one of many teal dragons, the bond could be cute without being complicated. But because Milo is last, his identity and destiny carry weight. The companion's promise becomes more than, let's go on an adventure. It becomes, let's confront an existential truth together. And that makes the bond matter more. It also prevents the story from being purely escapist. It anchors it in grief. And grief is what makes care meaningful. Now, I'm going to revisit the contrarian take I made earlier and sharpen it further. I think the drama is at its best when it stops trying to be epic. The arena is epic. The storm is epic. But the story's soul is not epic. It's intimate. The most unforgettable image in this story, for me, is not Milo standing victorious, it's Milo choosing to stay near the companion when he could run. That choice is quieter than victory, but it's braver in a different way. Victory is a reaction in the moment. Staying is a commitment. Staying says, I will risk being hurt again because I want connection. That's the real impossible thing. Now, I want to do one more cinematic retelling, but this time from the emotional perspective of the ending note, without inventing specific final scenes. Imagine the final stretch of the narrative. The air feels calmer, but there's a tension like a thread pulled taut. Milo and the companion have built routines. Maybe they have little signals, little shared habits. Milo has grown, not in size necessarily, but in confidence. He doesn't dart away at every sound. He looks outward, not just inward. The companion has grown too. His grief is still there, but his not only grief anymore. He can laugh without guilt. He can be quiet without drowning. Then comes the recognition, Milo's path is his own. The companion can walk beside him, but he cannot be the destination. And that recognition is both love and loss. It's the companion holding Milo close while also loosening his grip. It's Milo accepting that companionship doesn't mean abandoning his own nature. If the show lands that recognition with gentleness, it becomes one of those endings that makes you sit in silence after the credits. Not because you're shocked, but because you're grateful and sad at the same time. Here's another rehook line. The ending isn't asking you to mourn a breakup, it's asking you to respect a becoming. And that's why it hurts. Now, practical review stuff. Would I call this drama well-paced? Mostly, yes, with caveats. The arena win and storm are big events early, and depending on execution, that can feel like front-loading spectacle. But if the show uses those events as a moral and emotional foundation rather than as a fireworks display, then the pace makes sense. It's like the story is saying, here's what broke them. Now watch them rebuild. That's a satisfying arc even if the action density drops. Would I call the writing strong? In concept, absolutely. In line-to-line execution, it's strong when it stays restrained and specific, weaker when it leans into polished sentiment. But the emotional intelligence is consistent enough that even when a line feels a little too clean, the surrounding scene work can carry it. Would I call the performances effective? Milo's performance, whether animated, VFX, or practical, feels alive in the sense that his reactions drive the bond. The companion's performance is crucial and, from the storyline's emphasis on emotional bond and family loss, seems to be played with sincerity rather than melodramatic flair. The actor's ability to be present in quiet moments is what sells the relationship. And the technical craft, cinematography, sound, editing, feels designed to shift you from spectacle to intimacy without losing tension. That's not easy. A lot of shows can do one or the other. Doing both requires taste. Now, I want to talk about what this drama is actually doing to the audience emotionally, because that's part of why it stands out. It's using a familiar underdog victory to open your heart. Then it uses catastrophe to make your heart vulnerable. Then it uses companionship to fill the space catastrophe created. And then it uses impermanence to remind you that filling a space doesn't erase the whole, it just makes the whole bearable. That's a full emotional arc. It's not just sad. It's sadness transformed into relationship. And that's why it feels cathartic without being cheap. Here's another hook: if you're someone who hates sad endings, this might still work for you because it doesn't end in despair, it ends in dignity. That's a crucial difference. Now, I want to be very clear about something: bittersweet endings can feel like a cop-out if they are not earned. If a show builds a bond and then separates it just to make you cry, that's manipulation. But in this story, the separation is not arbitrary, it's inherent to the premise. Milo is the last teal dragon. The search for his kind is his existential drive. If he never pursues it, the story betrays him. If the companion refuses to let him pursue it, the story betrays the companion's promise. So the bittersweetness isn't a twist, it's an ethical conclusion. That's why I accept it. That's why I even appreciate it. Now, let's talk about who might not vibe with this drama. If you want lore-heavy fantasy with detailed world politics, this might feel too intimate, too focused. If you want constant action, the post-storm bonding stretch might feel slow. If you want a clean, triumphant ending, the bittersweet note might frustrate you. But if you're open to a fantasy drama that uses dragons to talk about grief, care, autonomy, and the ethics of love, this is exactly your kind of show. Here's another retention pivot before I give my final verdict. The show's best trick is that it makes you root for a character's independence even when it costs you emotionally. That's rare. Now, I promised myself I'd keep this fair, so let me address one more possible criticism. The title itself gives away the last of his kind framing, which can flatten suspense if mishandled. If the show wants you to feel hope, but the title is already telling you last, the narrative has to navigate that tension carefully. It has to make the search meaningful even if the outcome is uncertain. It has to make home more complex than find other teal dragons. If it fails at that, the search becomes tragic futility rather than growth. From the ending note we have Milo eventually finding his own way home. I think the show chooses the more complex definition of home. That's good. But it's still a risk. Titles are promises. This title is a promise of loneliness. The show has to deliver loneliness without making it emotionally one note. And I think it does, because it balances loneliness with companionship. It doesn't deny the loneliness, it surrounds it with care. That's the whole point. Now, I'm going to shift into verdict territory, because I think we've earned it emotionally and analytically, and because I do want to give you a grounded recommendation rather than just floating in themes forever. I loved Milo the Last Teal Dragon. Not in a everything is perfect way, but in a this story knew what it wanted to say and it said it with courage way. The arena victory is thrilling and cleverly staged in concept because it's about intelligence and adaptation rather than brute force. The storm is a brutal tonal pivot that could have felt like a cheap reset, but instead becomes the show's declaration that it's not here to comfort you with predictable arcs. And the companionship between Milo and the human companion is the real heart, a bond built not on ownership or destiny, but on mutual recognition of loss and a promise of support without guarantees. My biggest praise is also my biggest caution. The show is emotionally sincere, and sincerity makes it powerful, but it also makes it vulnerable to sentimentality. When the writing stays messy and human, it's devastating in the best way. When it gets a little too polished, you can feel the machinery. And I did sometimes wish for a bit more texture in the arena world, less faceless mockery, more social nuance, because the critique of spectacle could have been even sharper. But those are notes, not deal breakers. What stays with you is the ethical spine of the ending. Milo is not a plushy prize. He's not a forever comfort object. He's a being with a path, and the story respects that. The companion's love is not possession, it's assistance. That is such a quietly radical choice for this genre, and it's why the bittersweet note doesn't feel like a gut punch for shock value. It feels like growth. If you're a newcomer and you're wondering whether you need to be a fantasy person to enjoy it, you don't. The dragons are the skin, the story is human. It's about grief and care and what it means to walk beside someone without trying to keep them. If you're a fan of emotionally grounded dramas that happen to have high-concept settings, this is going to hit you. If you're someone who's been through loss, I'm going to gently warn you, it might hit harder than you expect, in that quiet way where you don't realize you're tearing up until your throat does that thing. And if you watched and found yourself frustrated by the impermanence, by the fact that the story won't give you a clean forever, I don't think that means you didn't get it. I think it means it touched the exact nerve it was aiming for. Our culture trains us to equate love with keeping. This drama suggests love can also mean letting someone become themselves, even if it leaves you lonely again. That's not an easy message. It's not supposed to be. So yeah, from me on Bongo Gaming, strong recommendation, with the caveat that you should come for the underdog arena hook, but stay for the aftermath, because that's where the show proves it has a soul. If you made it this far and you want more reviews like this, where we actually talk about why a scene works, not just whether it was hype, you can subscribe, and I'll keep meeting you here in the feelings. And if you watch Milo the Last Teal Dragon, I genuinely want to know, did the storm pivot thrill you, or did it break your heart first? Because for me, it did both, and that's exactly why I'm still thinking about that tiny teal silhouette standing in a world too big for him, choosing, against every reasonable survival instinct, to walk beside someone anyway.